In a neighborhood where the hum of everyday life is punctuated by children's laughter and neighbors greeting each other on their porches, Derek, a single father, found his peace. The neighborhood was predominantly black, a close-knit community where most people knew each other's names and shared a worried optimism for better days. Derek's modest home sat on a tree-lined street, the kind of place that wore its history gently but carried the weight of persistent whispers about the police. Derek, in his mid-30s, had grown up here and despite the challenges around, had worked hard to provide a stable environment for his young daughter Keisha. He juggled 2 jobs, a mechanic by day and a security guard by night, never letting the weariness show. His worries were typical: school fees, rent, groceries, and the chilling reality that many young men in the neighborhood had already been swept away by the justice system. One afternoon, as Derek walked home from work, he noticed a police cruiser slowly cruising down the street. It wasn't unusual to see police patrol cars, but lately, their presence had felt heavier, more scrutinizing. The cruiser pulled up beside a car a few houses down, a familiar beat for people paying too much attention. Drivers were being stopped more frequently, their rights barely acknowledged as officers searched them with suspicion. Derek's friend Marcus, who had been stopped 3 times in the last 2 weeks, warned him to be careful. "They're watching us like we're already guilty," Marcus said over the phone, tension creeping into his voice. "It's like they're looking for a reason to drag someone down." Unbeknownst to most residents, this sudden surge in traffic stops was part of a sting operation targeting their neighborhood. Undercover cops had been directed to plant drugs in vehicles, creating an illusion of rampant drug dealing. The police department, under pressure to justify its budget and presence, had ramped up these tactics, blurring the line between law enforcement and deception. As the community grew uneasy, Derek tried to shield Keisha from the growing storm, unaware that his steadfast refusal to play along with the police's hidden agenda would soon set off a chain of events that might change everything. The days following the increased police presence were tense. Derek started noticing the nervous glances shared among neighbors outside the corner store and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever an officer walked by. It was clear the sting operation had everyone on edge, but no one wanted to openly talk about it. The fear of retaliation was heavy in the air. One evening, as Derek returned home from his security shift, he was pulled over by 2 plainclothes officers. Their words were casual but laced with unspoken threats. "We're just trying to keep this neighborhood safe," one said, flipping through a small notepad. "But we need some help from folks like you, someone on the inside." They wanted Derek to become an informant, to give them names, locations, and anything that could help their ongoing operation. But Derek knew the deeper truth. He wasn't willing to betray his community or put others at risk, no matter the threat. The idea of turning informant clashed with every principle he'd held onto since his youth. "I'm not that guy," Derek said firmly, locking eyes with the officer. His voice steady despite the knot twisting in his stomach. "You won't get me to snitch on my own people." The officers' faces hardened for a brief moment, then shifted to rehearsed smiles. "Just think about it," one said before fading back into the shadows, leaving Derek alone on the quiet street. But staying true to his choice came at a price. Days later, a knock on Derek's door in the early morning shattered the fragile calm. Officers entered without a warrant, searching his modest home with practiced efficiency. They found what they claimed were bags of narcotics in the trunk of Derek's car, drugs Derek hadn't seen before and certainly hadn't placed there. The charges were severe: intent to distribute. Derek was arrested and taken away in handcuffs, the noise of his daughter's cries echoing behind him. At his first meeting with a public defender, Derek was warned in no uncertain terms. Fighting the charges would mean risking a longer sentence if convicted, as the prosecution held all the cards. The legal system was daunting, the stakes high. But what Derek still didn't understand was how deeply this was part of a larger machine, one that used inflated arrest numbers to justify funding and maintain control over neighborhoods like his. As Derek sat in the cold, sterile confines of the holding cell, the weight of his situation pressed down on him like a heavy fog. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the faces of other men who shared his fate. Each one had a story, a life interrupted by the same system that had ensnared him. Derek felt a mix of anger and despair, but he also felt a flicker of determination. He couldn't let this be the end of his story. After a few days, Derek was granted a brief meeting with his public defender, a weary-looking woman named Lisa. She shuffled through a stack of papers, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Derek, I need you to understand the gravity of your situation," she began, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "The evidence against you is circumstantial, but the prosecution is aggressive. They're going to push for a plea deal." Derek listened intently, his heart racing. "What does that mean for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means you could plead guilty to a lesser charge and serve a shorter sentence," Lisa explained. "But it also means admitting to something you didn't do. If you fight this, you risk a much harsher sentence if you lose." The thought of pleading guilty felt like a betrayal, not just to himself but to Keisha, who was waiting for him at home. "I can't do that," he said firmly, shaking his head. "I won't let them frame me for something I didn't do." Lisa sighed, her expression softening. "I understand your position, but you need to be realistic. The system is stacked against you. They have quotas to meet, and you're just another number to them." As Derek sat in the dim light of the meeting room, he began to connect the dots. The police weren't just targeting him. They were targeting his entire community. The arrests were part of a larger scheme to inflate crime statistics, justifying increased funding and resources for the department. It was a cycle of oppression that had been going on for years, and Derek was now caught in its web. Determined to fight back, Derek began to strategize. He reached out to friends and family, gathering support and information. He learned about others in the neighborhood who had faced similar situations, their stories echoing his own. They had been wronged, and together they could amplify their voices. As he prepared for his next court appearance, Derek felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for his community, for Keisha, and for the truth. The stakes were high, but he was ready to confront the system that had tried to silence him. As Derek's court dates approached, the pressure mounted. The local courthouse had become a revolving door for faces all too familiar to Derek: neighbors, friends, and people he barely recognized. They were caught in the same grind, pawns in a system fueled by quotas and fabricated charges. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge called his case. Derek's public defender, Lisa, had dug deep, uncovering inconsistencies in the police reports and evidence that hinted at the illegal planting of drugs. But despite the flaws, she warned Derek the system was reluctant to admit mistakes. The department's reputation and its funding depended on maintaining the illusion of a drug epidemic. During the trial, witnesses who had been arrested on similar charges testified quietly, sharing stories of police entrapment and manipulation. Community activists showed up, lending their voices to Derek's defense. Slowly, the truth began to surface, exposing the corruption hidden behind the badge. However, the fight was exhausting. Derek had to balance his court battles with caring for Keisha, who missed him dearly. The community organized support groups, legal aid, and awareness campaigns, hoping to bring lasting change. Through it all, Derek remained vigilant, refusing to back down. In the end, Derek's case was dismissed when evidence proved the drugs had been planted during traffic stops. While his name was cleared, the scars remained, the trauma of being framed, the fragile trust shattered between community and police. But Derek's story sparked a movement. The neighborhood rallied for reforms, demanding accountability, transparency, and an end to quota-driven policing. Derek became a voice for change, determined to protect his community from ever falling prey to similar injustices again. The quiet streets began to hum once more with hope rather than fear, as Derek and his neighbors stood together, refusing to let the system define their lives. It was a beginning, slow, steady, and hard one. The complete story is now expanded into 4 detailed chapters. If you want, I can assist with further enriching or formatting. With Derek's case behind him, life in the neighborhood slowly began to shift. The scars from the sting operation were deeply etched in the community's collective memory, but a newfound determination had taken root. Derek, once just a mechanic and security guard, found himself in the unexpected role of an advocate, speaking at community meetings, working alongside legal aid groups, and partnering with local activists who shared his vision for justice. Yet change was never easy. Derek soon learned that the system he had challenged was resilient, adapting to preserve the old ways. The police department, under scrutiny for their quota-driven tactics and entrapment, publicly promised reforms: body cameras, transparency reports, community liaison officers, but Derek and others watched cautiously. Trust was hard to rebuild when the wound had been so raw. Undeterred, Derek helped spearhead grassroots efforts to educate young people about their rights during traffic stops and encounters with law enforcement. He collaborated on workshops that taught the community how to document abuses and navigate the legal system, turning fear into empowerment. Keisha, growing up amidst both struggle and hope, proudly watched her father's transformation from a victim of the system to a catalyst for change. At city council meetings, Derek's voice echoed alongside others demanding budget reallocations. Funds shifted away from aggressive policing toward social programs, youth services, and job training initiatives. The fight was slow and often frustrating, but every small victory mattered. More importantly, Derek fostered reconciliation dialogues where police officers, community members, and local leaders could confront difficult truths openly. These conversations, though sometimes painful, laid the groundwork for real understanding and change. In the quiet moments, Derek reflected on how far they had come. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. The legacy of suspicion didn't vanish overnight, but the seeds of change were growing. For the first time in a long while, the streets were alive not just with fear or pain, but with hope, resilience, and the promise of a better tomorrow.